The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin, blending with the quiet murmur of passengers settling into their seats. Flight 762 was en route from New York to Los Angeles, a routine, uneventful flight. Businessmen tapped away on their laptops, exhausted parents tried to keep their kids entertained, and a flight attendant moved gracefully down the aisle, offering pre-flight refreshments. But for Marcus Evans, a 32-year-old software engineer returning from a tech conference, this flight was about to become anything but routine. Before we dive deeper into this gripping and thrilling story, let us know where you're watching from today. And if tales of action, courage, and standing up against injustice captivate you, don't forget to subscribe to Story Dash. Soon, we'll share another story that will leave you speechless. Marcus, a well-dressed black man with a calm demeanor, had been upgraded to first class thanks to his frequent flyer miles. He was quietly reading a book, minding his own business, when he sensed the eyes of the middle-aged white man seated beside him, burning into his skin. The man, Thomas Briggs, adjusted his gold watch, sighed loudly, and muttered, "Unbelievable." Marcus glanced up. "Something wrong?" Thomas scoffed, shaking his head. "No offense, but I didn't pay thousands of dollars to sit next to—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely in Marcus's direction. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had dealt with this kind of attitude before, the quiet racism of the privileged, the entitlement dripping off every word. "Next to what exactly?" Marcus asked, his tone even. Thomas smirked. "You know what I mean." The conversation should have ended there, but Thomas wasn't done. I always assumed first class was for successful people, not for, well, you know. He eyed Marcus's crisp blazer, then his book. "But I guess they let anyone up here now." The words were low and sharp, meant to cut. A few passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats, overhearing the exchange. Some buried themselves in their phones, pretending not to hear. Others darted nervous glances at Marcus, silently wondering if he would push back. Marcus inhaled deeply, willing himself to stay calm. He wasn't about to let one ignorant man ruin his flight. But before he could respond, a voice from across the aisle cut through the tension. "You got a problem, buddy." A man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered with a slight New York accent, leaned forward. His name was Jake Dawson, a former firefighter and a man who had zero tolerance for bullies. Thomas turned to him, annoyed. "This doesn't concern you." Jake smirked. "Yeah, well, it does now." He glanced at Marcus. "You good, man?" Marcus nodded appreciatively. "Yeah, I'm fine." Jake turned back to Thomas. "Look, if you've got an issue, why don't you take it up with the flight crew? I'm sure they'd be happy to escort you to economy class, since first class is apparently beneath you now." A few passengers chuckled. Thomas's face flushed red. "Listen, I don't need a lecture from some blue-collar nobody. I have a right to speak my mind." Jake's smile vanished. "Yeah? And I have a right to tell you that you're a racist piece of garbage." The tension was palpable. Flight attendants had now noticed the argument and were making their way toward the seats. Just when it seemed the situation might settle, Thomas took it a step too far. He turned to Marcus, his voice dripping with disdain. "You people always play the victim, don't you?" Before Marcus could react, Thomas did the unthinkable. He shoved him. The moment his hand made contact, time slowed. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The flight attendants froze mid-step. Every eye was suddenly locked on the scene. And then, boom. Jake moved like lightning. In a single motion, he launched himself out of his seat, grabbing Thomas by the collar and slamming him against the divider between first class and business class. "You just put your hands on him?" Jake's voice was low and deadly, his eyes burning with fury. Thomas struggled, his face now a mixture of fear and shock. "Let me go," he sputtered. "Not until you apologize," Jake growled. A flight attendant rushed forward. "Sir, please release him." Marcus, ever the peacemaker, placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Let him go, man. He's not worth it." Jake took a deep breath and finally released his grip, sending Thomas stumbling back into his seat. By now, the entire cabin was watching. Passengers murmured among themselves, some whispering words of support for Marcus, others stunned by Jake's fearless reaction. A young mother in the row behind them pulled out her phone and started recording, knowing this was a moment that needed to be seen by the world. The viral potential of such a confrontation was undeniable, and she knew people needed to witness what had just transpired. An elderly man a few rows back shook his head disapprovingly. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. But this time, it wasn't directed at Marcus. It was directed at Thomas. Another passenger, a woman in a power suit, leaned toward Marcus and quietly said, "You handled that with more grace than most people ever could." A flight attendant stepped forward, her face firm. "Sir," she said to Thomas, "we have a zero-tolerance policy for physical aggression and discriminatory behavior. You need to gather your belongings." Thomas's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" "The captain has authorized your removal from the aircraft. We're making an emergency landing at the nearest airport. You'll be escorted off by security upon arrival." The look of horror on Thomas's face was priceless. Jake smirked. "Guess that first-class seat wasn't worth it, huh?" 30 minutes later, Flight 762 touched down for an unscheduled stop. Thomas was escorted off the plane, his protests ignored. As the flight resumed, a flight attendant approached Marcus with an apologetic smile. "We're so sorry for what happened. The captain wanted you to know that your next flight is on us. First class, of course." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "I appreciate that." Jake leaned over. "Mind if I grab that extra seat next time?" Marcus laughed. "Only if you promise not to tackle anyone mid-flight." The two shook hands, their bond forged through a moment of bravery. By the next morning, the incident had gone viral. Passenger removed after racist attack on black man mid-flight. Former firefighter stands up to racism at 30,000 feet. Everyday hero protects black passenger in shocking plane altercation. Comments flooded in. "We need more people like Jake in the world." Karma served at 30,000 feet. "Marcus handled this with more grace than I ever could." Jake wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't a superhero. He was just an everyday guy who refused to let hatred win. Would you have done what Jake did? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this story as powerful as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Story Dash for more incredible real-life stories. Not all heroes wear capes. Some just refuse to sit in silence.